Welcome to the very first episode of Leadership That Liberates. Wow, we made it. We made it. I have been thinking about this literally for years and talking about this literally for years. And I have avoided and procrastinated. There were things that still needed to be digested, pieces that still needed to gestate before I birthed them into the world, and I have really been in a lot of avoidance and fear, and I want to share that and name it and normalize it because I think it is so common that the things that we really, really deeply care about and feel passionate about and are an expression of our soul's calling. Scary to put them out into the world because it's really a vulnerable thing to do. And of all the people that I work with, it is the most common challenge that I see. And so I just want to normalize that there's no shame in honoring our pace and our process in pursuit of our purpose. And especially because these parts of us that are wise protectors, these parts of us that are afraid to be seen, and all that could potentially come with being seen, there's fear there, and that fear makes sense. And we try to protect ourselves from the quote unquote negative things that could happen on the other side of being seen. And it's so funny because literally as I was sitting down to record this first episode, this chair flew back from under me and I landed so hard on my tailbone and spent 10 minutes before coming here to record icing my butt. And I really feel like that was that last little part of me that was like, don't do it. Don't do it. There's still time. Like, just don't do it. And so I'm just sitting there icing my butt, just witnessing that part of myself and being like, it's okay. It's okay. I see you. I love you. And I'm sharing all of this, one, to normalize this. And that's what so much of what leadership that liberates is going to actually be about, is normalizing our human experience and dispelling shame and the power that it holds over us and the ways that it cycles into our lived existence, the way it shapes the world we live in. This podcast, this YouTube, it is a culmination of my own lived experience. It represents this body of work I've been creating. It's really the culmination of my entire life. And for this first episode, it feels important to tell that story. And I don't know if it's because I'm Greek and I'm from a high context culture, if it's because I'm an anthropologist, or because I do love storytelling, but I can't talk about the thing without also talking about why the thing exists in the first place and how the thing came to be. So it only feels right and fitting to share the story that led me here, to share the pieces and parts of my life that have shaped this body of work and everything that's led to this moment. I'm just so grateful to be here and to finally be doing this and to be witnessed in this process by all of you. And I feel emotional as I'm saying that because it is scary and it's also exciting and liberating. And it's why I'm here. This story, this body of work, really begins in my childhood. There are a lot of layers of my childhood, and you'll see as I share more about my work and my leadership framework as the weeks go on, you'll understand why the layers of our childhood and the role they've played, why it's of paramount importance. And so that's where I'm beginning. There are so many pieces of that part of my life that have shaped and influenced where I am now. And one, which feels very strong and significant, is the environment that I grew up in. My dad was an addict, an alcoholic, just extremely unpredictable behavior, extremely explosive behavior. He was a very scary man, terrifying. And my life was really shaped by that terror. And my mom doesn't actually have any memories of the ways in which she behaved when I was a child. But basically, from both of them, there was a lot of abuse, and it was scary. And I made myself small in so many ways. I feel a lot of sadness for that part of me. She's very present in my life. It shaped the way that I move through the world in so many ways. Just this constant fear, the anticipation of rejection and of silencing and of dismissal and lack of safety. So there's that layer that has really, really shaped my work. And again, you'll hear me talk so much about the importance of our childhood because it becomes deeply embedded within our unconscious beliefs, our unconscious patterns, the way we move through the world, the way we navigate the world, the way we relate to the world and the people around us and in relationship with us, and in so many ways that we are not aware of. And you will see that I will go deep into the parts of myself that try to hide. I'll share with you different ways that I explore my own unconscious processes in ways that can support you to ask yourself the kinds of questions that bring those beliefs and patterns to light. Awareness is one piece. There's other stuff we have to do to create a sense of felt safety for ourselves. But the awareness of why we do the things we do in the ways we do them is really at the crux of our ability to create change. We cannot change anything without that awareness. And so much of my work is about creating that awareness. So that's one piece of my childhood experience that has really shaped me. Another layer is that my parents were immigrants. They both went to the US from this very small village in Greece. We were there without family, without ties or connections to community. There were no Greeks around us. I grew up in small town, South Carolina, the Bible Belt. Racism was rampant. Those things also really shaped me. This kind of out of placeness, this lack of belonging. It was interesting because in a sense I felt more belonging in Greece, but I also didn't really fully belong there either. And the tendency to be misunderstood was also a really big part of my lived experience. I was sad a lot. As a kid, I was really sad. And of course, there was the element of the environment that I was growing up in and the scariness of that, which contributed understandably to the sadness that I experienced. And I felt like I wasn't supposed to be on Earth. I wasn't supposed to be alive. And I'll share stories about this later. I've learned a lot about where these feelings came from, but there was this heaviness that I felt like I'm not supposed to be here and nobody actually wants me to be here. And at the same time, I had this sense of purpose and this knowing that I was here for a reason. So it was a very interesting duality to hold and to be with, especially as a child. And God bless me, I was an old little soul, a very wise little kid. And sometimes I joke that I peaked as a teen. I was just like so wise and mature as a young one that I just feel like maybe now I'm not. as wise or mature as people my age. The other thing was that I had this desire to deeply understand humans and why humans did the things they did, especially when it came to deviant or dangerous or harmful behavior. My mom used to watch all kinds of stories and documentaries about murders and serial killers. She tried to shield me from all of that and say, like, you're too young, you have to go to your room. But I would sneak late in the night and peek around the corner and I would watch the TV while she was watching these things. And I was fascinated because for me, even as a child, there was this knowing or this understanding that it is pain that is at the root of these kinds of behaviors. And I wanted to understand that pain. I just had so much empathy and compassion for that. And then when I was 12, 13, I was deeply depressed. And there were these commercials that they would play on TV for this kind of uh, like mental health institution. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. But they would share these checklists of signs of depression. And I remember just like watch those things. And one time I said to my mom, well, Mom, I check every box. I check every one of those boxes. And yeah, I was just in this darkness and this sadness and this pain. And it almost felt like it wasn't even all mine. And it probably wasn't. I'm sure I was absorbing so much from my parents. But yeah, I was deeply depressed and I was pretty suicidal. And I was home alone one day and I was snooping in my parents' room, was opening all the drawers and stuff. And I found this handgun and I was like, okay, well, this is it. Honestly, I had been for months, I had been fantasizing about suicide. I had been imagining all the ways that I could do it, that I would do it. When I found this gun and I was home alone, that duality of that deep knowing that I'm here for a reason came into my conscious awareness. And I felt this very, very clear message from my own inner knowing, from spirit, God, universe, source, whatever we want to call it, this very clear message that I could not make that choice, that I was supposed to be here, that there was a reason I was here, and that I was going to help people, and that I had to stay here to do that work that spirit put me on earth to do. And it's really one of the most visceral, vivid memories from my life is that moment. And I put the gun away. It didn't dissipate the depression. I was still in very much a deep darkness, but I was very clear that that wasn't the answer, regardless of the fact that it was something I had thought about so much. I think it was the following summer. I went to art school because I was in this like art school that I attended every summer. And there were these two people that summer in particular, I kind of gravitated toward and we hung out together every day and did everything together. It was Fran and Ned. And the three of us were like this little trio. We were inseparable, spent all day, every day together. Ned was someone who I was very open with about this darkness that I was feeling and this suicidal ideation and how heavy life felt for me. And he was so encouraging and so supportive. And he just offered me so much love and honestly, like, really, really helped me move through that. Really. And he was very special to me. He meant a lot to me. A few months later, it was going to be my birthday and I was having a party and I called Ned and I said, I'd really love for you to be there. It would mean so much for me if you came. He was like, yeah, Lena, of course, I would love to be there. I will be there. It'll be really good to see you. The day of my birthday came and he didn't come. But what did happen is that my dad showed up wasted out of his mind, made a huge scene, screaming at my friends, turning over tables. He tried to choke one of my friends. We're 14, we're 14. It was humiliating. I felt so much shame, and I was so sad that Ned wasn't there because there was something in me that was like, if he had been here, there would just be something to ground me, and he's not here. That also felt devastating. And 2 days later, Ned died by suicide. Sometimes it's really hard to put into words how much that impacted me. Because I felt almost this sense of responsibility that I hadn't known. Because I hadn't known. I had no idea. But this was somebody that I had confided in and that had held space for me and that had offered me so much support and safety and encouragement. And I had actually no idea that he was going through what I was going through and that he was feeling this same darkness and sadness and desperation. And I learned after from some people from his school that this is something he had struggled with for many years. He'd been on medications, and I just felt so upset with myself that I hadn't known. And filled with all these questions. What if I had shown up for him the way he showed up for me? Would it have made any difference? Would it have changed anything? I had no responsibility in that. And I don't think there's anything I could have done to change the way things happened. But it was through that experience that whatever message I received from Spirit a year before that around my purpose and helping people, it was through Ned's death that that became very clear for me. That I want to create spaces where people feel deeply seen and deeply known and witnessed and celebrated and loved and accepted and heard and understood and safe. I wanted people to feel safe, to be all that they are and to feel everything that they feel and to know that they don't have to hide these parts of themselves that society creates so much shame around. And I think darkness and sadness is something our society creates a lot of shame around. And that's why so many of us have a hard time showing our emotions or telling people we're not okay. It's why so much of our culture is wrapped up in this falsity and this pretense and these masks and these facades. And we try in so many ways to be what we think other people want and need and expect us to be. And very often, that's somebody who has it all together and who is strong and doesn't struggle. That's not human. And I'm here to create space for it to be safe, to be human, because that's what we are. And I actually think there's so much power in being real about what's true for us, individually and collectively. Over the next couple of years, I really started to think maybe I would like to be a therapist because I had spent most of my life being committed to the idea that I would be an architect. I really wanted to be an architect. And I spent years designing floor plans and building little miniature buildings, and I really was so committed to that vision. But I started to question if it was really what I wanted. I did ultimately enroll into an architecture program in university. And then just before classes started, I changed my major. And I decided to study sociology and psychology because I wanted to be a therapist. So enter into university, and I'm studying these things and I'm loving it. I was a natural at it. I was so gifted at these subjects. I literally never studied for any test, and I would get between a 95 and 100 score every single time. And I actually had one of my professors call me into his office and he was like, Lena, I'm just amazed because if your responses to the written portions of these tests weren't so original and unique, I would be sure that you are cheating. This person's tests, I would turn them in like 10, 15 minutes. It would literally take me 10 to 15 minutes to answer 50 multiple choice questions and a series of short answer and 3 to 4 long answer questions. And he was like, what's going on? I know you're not cheating, but I'm just amazed. And I was like, yeah, it just feels natural to me. It all makes sense to me. There was something in me that had this innate understanding of these subjects. And at the same time, there was still this underlying fear that I was holding on to, that if I become a therapist, can I hold it? Can I be with it? With the sadness that people will bring, with the darkness, because I am a very empathetic person. I will literally cry at anything. Any TV show, any movie I watch, doesn't even matter what's happening, I will cry. I just was so afraid that I couldn't hold it. Obviously, having lost Ned in the way that I did, that was bringing up a lot of stuff for me. What happens if I have a client that dies by suicide? How will I deal with that? So, as much as I loved the subjects, there was still this underlying fear that I didn't have the capability or the capacity to be in that kind of role. Simultaneously to all of that, I got really involved with the international student community at my school because I'd always been so drawn to difference because I had this bicultural identity existence in the world. And I was like, oh, they're misfits here too. So let's be misfit, misunderstood together. And I really wanted to create safety and belonging for them in this place where I knew that they felt out of place. That was really what I poured my time and energy and intention into as a university student. I was so devoted and dedicated to the international student community. I lived in something called the cultural exchange community, where international students were paired with domestic students in this apartment complex with the intention of cultural exchange. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved learning about different places and perspectives and ways of being in the world and truths and realities. And it was very eye-opening for me and validating in a lot of ways. I would host events and create cultural exchange opportunities. I would plan trips for people to see different parts of the States. I was just so immersed in that. And that passion that was brought to life in me through that experience, paired with the fear that I had around being a therapist, kind of converged. And then I was like, maybe I don't want to be a therapist. Maybe I don't want to get my master's in social work. I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school. I am a forever student. I love school. If I could just go to school for the rest of my life, I would do it. I love school. I love learning. I love being in a classroom. I absolutely love it. So I knew that I was going to grad school. I just didn't really know for what exactly. So I decided to take a gap year. I decided that I was going to go teach English in Tanzania. I really wanted to have a drastically different cultural experience. And there was that part of me that wanted to do good and save the world that was driving that. I went there and it just changed my whole life because I was confronted in ways that I never had been by the realities of colonialism and the ways in which I was given so much power as a 22-year-old white girl who knows nothing. It was so eye-opening. And I had to confront my white saviorism. It really shifted the trajectory of my life. And I am so grateful for that experience, even though it was problematic in a lot of ways. I'm sure that I'll do a whole podcast episode on all of that and the complexities and the nuance and the layers to that. But it was really important that I had that experience, even though it's something that I would caution people against now as an older, wiser version of myself. I decided after that that actually what I wanted to get my master's in was cultural anthropology. I didn't really have a lot of clarity. It's a field where you have to be super specialized in an area of research, and I didn't really know what that would be. So I sent out these half-assed applications everywhere. Once I entered that field and understood how it worked, I was like, oh my God, no wonder I wasn't accepted into any of the schools I applied to except this one. I was accepted into the University of Colorado in Boulder because my advisor, Dennis McGilvray, was a specialist in religion. And everything I had written about in my application was around my interests in religion. Because I'd always been deeply fascinated by different religions. That's another thing that I will share about in a podcast episode is my own journey and experience with religion. But yeah, there was something in the way that I wrote that really resonated with Dennis, and he wanted to work with me. So I get there, and I really don't know what I'm doing. I really don't know what my research is about. I was surrounded by really smart people. And it was the first time where, on an intellectual level, I felt inferior and incompetent. I was like, oh my God, these people are brilliant. And they understand so many things about the world to a depth that I just can't even comprehend right now. It was really incredible because the emphasis that was placed on colonialism and its impacts around the world and the role that whiteness plays in the world we live in, I needed that. I needed that perspective. It was the right place for me to be. I don't really know what it would have been like at the other schools that I applied to, but I know that I was meant to be in that place with those people talking about those things. Because I had this focus on religion, I wrote some kind of paper about the role of religion in Greekness and Greek identity. And as I was researching for that paper, wow, I just went down the rabbit hole of all the possible things that there are to look at and explore. And I was pretty hooked into it because another piece of my lived experience is that I am Greek and that I grew up in this post-genocide environment when I was in Greece. A lot of people aren't aware that there was a genocide against Greeks and other Christian groups as well in the early 1900s, which my great-grandparents were directly affected by. They all fled this genocide. And that's how my family ended up in the part of Greece where we are now. So there was always this kind of narrative of Greece versus Turkey and the ways in which Greeks were enslaved by the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, and this genocide that happened, especially from my grandfather on my mother's side. He really hated Turkish people. That impacted me because I didn't like the way he spoke about Turkish people. There was, again, this deep knowing in me that hatred towards them doesn't solve or resolve anything. It just adds to the cycle of violence. So when I started studying the role of religion in Greek identity and actually looking at the role religion played in this genocide and the ways in which Greeks also committed and perpetuated violence against Turkish people, that really became the focus of my research. I have grown up with this narrative that we are victims, and of course we had been. And there's another side to that. We're not blameless in this story. And that was the part that I was really interested in understanding, is what are the ways in which we have caused harm through our desire to retaliate or to feel some sense of justice or vengeance. As I was studying that, I learned about this concept called the proximate other, which is where we demonize and dehumanize those who are so much like us that it's too close for comfort. And because we don't want to see ourselves reflected in them, we have to make them something other, which is much of what the conflict and the division in the world is based in and rooted in. So it was actually at that time kind of looked down upon to act on your research, to be involved in advocacy work or social justice work. And that didn't feel good to me because I was like, all of you people have such in-depth knowledge about why things are the way they are. And all you're going to do is write papers and books that are going to be read by other academics, and nobody's going to do anything to try to create any kind of change in the world. That just didn't feel aligned to me because I really wanted to be in the world and do in the world. And so I decided that I also wanted to get an additional certification in international development studies. I'm just going to work in international development. And then I was like, what? No, I'm not. Because then as I studied that and understood, again, how deeply neo-colonial that whole field is and how it was born out of this desire to subjugate certain people, to actually create patterns of dependency. And I think this is another thing we will have a whole conversation about, because I know that people enter that field with the best of intentions without really understanding its origins and why it exists in the first place. But it's created in such a way, there's this illusion of goodness. And it's not that there aren't good things that happen, but there are so many unintended harms and long-term effects that are created through that system and that institution of international development and humanitarian aid that just merits its own conversation. But again, these are things that were deeply shaping and molding my views of the world and the direction that my interests and passions and pursuits were taking. I got my master's, and I really wanted to work in international education. So again, while I was in grad school, I was very involved with the international student community on that campus. And I wanted to work on a university campus. That's what I wanted to do, and work in international education, student exchange. I applied for so many jobs. This was 2012, post 2008. The economy was not great. Getting a job was actually pretty hard. And I ended up moving to Asia to teach English again. I went to China and I was an oral English teacher. And that was also a very interesting experience because as an oral English teacher, where I'm not actually teaching about the language itself, but really more helping people practice and feel confident in speaking, I'm going to have them talk about global issues and cultural challenges. And this is what I was really focused on in my teaching, which I received a lot of backlash for. The criticism was that you're here to teach them how to speak, not how to think. That's literally what the school administration said to me based on the feedback from parents. The kids loved it. They were 11, 12 years old having, wow, the most mind-blowing conversations about globalization and all of these things. But there was just this lack of acceptance for my approach and what I was doing. I started looking for different opportunities and I applied to this role at an international school in that city, Hangzhou, where I was living. And that school was like, there's this organization that we're partnering with who is designing a curriculum for us. And we actually think you should connect with them and work with them. You would be great with their organization. So they put me in touch. It was the Jump Foundation, and I just loved what they were doing. It was experiential education, global citizenship. There was very much this focus on personal development and self-inquiry, and I just loved it. So I got a job with Jump. I relocated to Beijing. I actually designed with another person the curriculum that we then implemented in Hangzhou, which was how I made this connection in the first place. And then after that curriculum project was over, I was given the opportunity to relocate to our office in Thailand. And so I went to Thailand, still with Jump, but in a different role. I was a program manager, but also a program designer and developer, also partnership manager. I was managing our partnerships with schools across Southeast Asia and Europe and the Middle East. And then I was traveling and I was going to these schools and having partnership development and partnership management meetings. And I was designing leadership development experiences for juniors and seniors in international schools. And I was traveling to these schools and facilitating these programs and managing teams. And it was an amazing experience. When I eventually decided to go back to the US, I ended up getting a job at Florida State University in what I had been trying to do when I first left grad school. So I was running all of the intercultural programming on the campus and intercultural events, cultural exchange programs, teaching, intercultural communication forces. I loved it. I loved doing that work. And I reached this point where I was looking back over everything I'd done and over all these years leading up to that and really noticing this pattern. And what felt really true for me was that the division between people is a reflection of the disconnect within. And I knew that I wanted to create something that addressed that disconnection in order to dissolve that division and build those bridges. So many spaces that I've been in have in many ways been putting a band-aid on things. Like we're trying to address the symptoms of these problems, but we're not actually getting to the root of what's creating them in the first place. So just continue to exist and we just continue to put these band-aids on. But if we don't treat the thing at the root, at the source, we're always going to be in this loop, right? I knew that I wanted to create a business. I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew that I wanted the work that I did to address that inner disconnection in a way that then addressed that external division. I just didn't really know what that looked like. I wanted to create something. Just didn't quite know what. I ended up quitting my job with this intention of starting my business. I spent 1 year spiraling in confusion and lack of clarity and just like, what am I doing? I don't know. What am I creating? I don't know. I think lack of clarity is often a mask for fear. It's a way that we protect ourselves from the things that feel really vulnerable and scary. It's like, oh, I don't really know. I don't really know. But there's something in us that knows. We just don't know how to meet that part of ourselves. And I didn't know at that time. I didn't know how to meet that part of myself. After a year and running through my savings, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to create something. So I started my business, and it was very much this kind of iteration of what I had been doing for the last maybe 5 years. It was this kind of combination of the work I had done at Jump with the work I had done at FSU, and I was kind of like putting those things together. But it just wasn't the right thing. So my business kept evolving. I was changing what I was doing completely and moving more and more in different ways into addressing this disconnection. And then a couple of years ago, I joined this mastermind, which was a whole big shadow work experience in and of itself. The beginning of that mastermind was October 2023. So it coincided with the Hamas attack on October 7th and the genocide that has unfolded in Gaza since then, which is a cultural, religious relationship that I studied when I was in grad school, studying war and religious-based conflict and how that happens and what it's rooted in and how it unfolds. And there are similarities between that history with what unfolded between Greece and Turkey. It was bringing up a lot for me around the things I had studied, my own cultural background, the collective trauma that I come from, the ways that that shows up in the world. Having those things coincide, and the coach that I was working with in this mastermind, the kinds of questions she was asking me, and the ways that she was reflecting back to me so much of what I've done in my life and all the ways that these pieces fit together, it kind of started to make sense. And that was the beginning of creating this body of work that I'm now going to be sharing through this podcast. And so what I'm really doing through this body of work is looking at this recursive relationship between shame and self-suppression and systems of oppression and the ways in which we are internalizing oppression through self-suppression and then perpetuating and repeating oppression in the ways in which we move throughout the world. We're creating this loop where we're not really getting to the heart of things, to the core, to the root of why this loop just continues to perpetuate and to recreate itself. What I'm sharing in this podcast is really about examining that relationship between self-suppression and systems of oppression, that relationship between the individual and the collective. If we want to create a world that is loving and just, where people are free and safe, we have to look at what is driving the divisions. And I think that's that disconnection from self, from soul essence, from the spirit of love that is at the core of who we are as beings, and all of the ways that that gets distorted through our lived experience. And those distortions create divisions, and divisions that create destruction. That's what this podcast is about. So thank you. Thank you for being here. In the next episode, I am going to talk about this leadership framework I've been developing, liberatory love, which is really what the content of this podcast will be drawn from. This body of work that is the culmination of everything I just shared. And it will become so clear if you decide to stick around that you're going to understand how all of this context created this framework and this approach to creating change in the world, and why I see things the way I do and teach about things in the way I do, and why it feels really important to share the kinds of perspectives and deep dives and personal stories that I'll share throughout this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I'm going to need to put some ice on my butt. Wow, I just can't believe how that I fell and the force of that fall. And it's so funny. I really think it was this little part of me that wanted to protect me from being seen and from doing this, but I did it. And thank you so much for joining me.